and present this to the people who were unable to make it today. So we will continue on here. Sam, if you'd like to get us started.
So we'll just do a quick overview of who ORSP is and what we do. Next slide, thank you. The mission of ORSP is to seek and promote scholarship, research, creative activities, and engagement by encouraging and providing comprehensive support to faculty and staff in the pursuit of sponsored programs. We assist the entire campus, and we help from the pre-award stage, even before the pre-award stage, the pre-proposal stage, and even earlier than that, when you're just thinking about funding, all the way through to the post-award stage. Once you have received funding, and our office processes the award. We are currently located in Race 109. Next slide. We have a pretty small but mighty crew. Currently, our entire staff is working hybrid schedules. So the best way to get in touch with us is via email. Some of us are in the office some days, so if you stop by, you might be able to find someone. If not, you'd probably get a quicker response via email. On the right-hand side, so Todd and myself and Ashley handle pre-award services. Ashley also does, as she mentioned, some post-award tasks. On the left-hand side, Meredith is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research. And then Angie Morlock is the Assistant Director, and she also handles all of the contracts as well. So why are grants important? They create opportunities for students to engage in research, and they enrich the learning environment. Competitive funding builds credibility for you, for your department, for UTC. It also allows you protected time for research when you have grant funding. It's a strong case when you come up for promotion and tenure. And grant awards draw attention to your department, especially really competitive ones like NSF's career and RE programs.
And help you with student recruitment for future when you've got those types of programs, for sure.
Correct. So as I mentioned, ORSP offers numerous services. We'll start with what we offer pre-award. So when you are before you submit your proposal. So our office can help we can help you get started. So we are able to assist in finding funding opportunities for you. We can secure sample funded proposals from some sponsors. So if you're interested in seeing what a successful proposal looks like, we can reach out to previously funded PIs and request that they share their proposal with us. This kind of helps our PIs get a sense of the level of detail in each section, and so they can kind of get an idea for how to craft their own proposal. We can help you understand the application guidelines. We often create timelines and proposal component checklists so you know exactly what's required. We also have tip sheets for certain agencies, kind of one-pager informational info. Our office also helps with budget development, and this is probably the thing that we want to be involved with in the most. So we can help you draft a budget, we can help you think through it, we can do the calculations for you. And when you're developing your proposal, we're typically developing the budget at the same time. Okay, so another service that we offer with enough time, we can identify and pay external reviewers to review your proposal prior to submission. Typically, we reach out to previously funded PIs, so they are familiar with the program. Usually somebody who's has a similar research interest as you. So they are freshly funded. They know how to write a successful proposal, and they'll provide feedback. And then our office pays a modest stipend for their time and for their comments. And then you're able to incorporate that feedback into your proposal to help make it the best version it can be before you submit to the funder. We also assist with the coordination of collaborative efforts. So if your proposal has sub-awards or other institutions involved, our office can connect with the partners to discuss what's required of them, to set up deadlines, timelines, provide them with information of what's required from them. We can also participate in team meetings and check-ins and whatever you'd like us to participate with. So that was some of our typical pre-award services. And at the time of proposal submission, we also assist with that. So we can do a compliance review. So once your full proposal is done, we can check to make sure that it complies with agency requirements, UT fiscal policy, to make sure that we're not including anything in the budget that's not allowed, like alcohol, entertainment, events like that. We can also do a budget review to make sure that the calculations are correct, and that everything is allowable that we're including. Additionally, we can also review for compliance considerations to make sure there aren't any red flags or things that we need to discuss with another department or office. And we can also check for formatting compliance to make sure that, for example, we are following the margin guidelines, or if the sponsor says we have to use Times New Roman size 12, we can make sure that that is actually happening on all the documents, that we're not exceeding page limits. And this is helpful to ensure that the proposal is not returned without review. And returning without review means that the proposal isn't even getting reviewed. Our office also assists with CAIUS. So CAIUS is the UT system's internal system for internal approvals and our official record keeping system. So proposals should be routed in CAIUS 5 business days prior to submission. And if you're new to CAIUS, or if you just have questions, we're happy to do a one-on-one Zoom with you and walk through all the sections. We'll also review if you want to work on your CAIUS entry and then ask us to review. We're happy to do that to make sure everything's correct. And once your CAIUS proposal is routed, it goes to your department head, your dean, and then any other department heads and deans who of faculty who might be involved in your proposal as well. So if you have a collaborator from a different department, it would also go to their dean and department head. And 95% of proposals that are submitted from UTC are submitted through our office. So we will complete the institutional forms for you and prepare the grant proposal, the package. We will actually submit for you. Typically, when it's time to submit, we like to schedule a brief Zoom meeting where the PI in our office will go through the full application and just do one final check before we submit. There are a few instances where the PI is expected to submit. Sometimes it could be via email. Sometimes there's kind of like Google Forms that are very simple, and the expectation is that the PI submits. If that's ever the case, ORSP should still be involved. So you should still keep us in the loop and let us review your proposal ahead of time. And if it's an email, we ask that you copy us on that email correspondence. So once an award has been made to UTC, our office also handles the contract negotiations and any other research-related agreements. So that would include things like contracts, memorandums of understanding, non-disclosure agreements, click-through agreements, licensing agreements, and anything that might look like a contract should be negotiated and should come to our office. The most important thing about today's presentation is this yellow text right here. Do not sign anything that looks like a contract. Only the Vice Chancellor for Research is authorized to sign contracts on behalf of the institution. In addition to contract negotiations, our post-award team will also process awards as they come in and send out award orientation emails and midterm kind of reminder emails throughout the duration of the project. Our office also sets up account requests. And note that the post-award financial services are handled by accounting services. So you might correspond with Virginia Moore in accounting services and Nikki as well. They're the two people that we deal with often. So they handle all the financial aspects of it. Our office can also assist with the just-in-time requests. And if you're not familiar with what just-in-time means, so after the proposals have all been reviewed during the merit review process, sometimes the program officer will come back to applicants who have scored favorably, and they might request additional information. So it could be an updated current and pending support form. It could be IRB approval. They might ask us to update our budget. Sometimes we have to reduce it a little bit. They might ask for an updated abstract. And these items are typically due back pretty quickly. So we've seen them due back within a few days. Sometimes we're given a week or two to respond. And once we send these just-in-time items back, usually, hopefully that leads to an award. Our office will also help with subaward execution. So if your proposal has a subaward, so a collaborating institution involved, we would generate the subaward. And then we also assist with other post-award actions. So personnel change, maybe you have someone on your project who's moving to a different institution, or you need to change your co-PI. Sometimes we have to do budget revisions or requesting no-cost extensions. That's all handled by Orsp.
Thank you, Sam. So one of the common questions that we get is how to find funding opportunities, right? So at UTC, we subscribe to Pivot, and Pivot's this comprehensive database that pulls all types of funding opportunities from the federal level all the way down to foundation level. You already have access since you're a UTC employee, so you just create an account and you can set up searches using that account based on keyword, your research area, any sort of sponsors that you're interested in. And you can set that to send you weekly email bulletins that show new listings that meet that criteria. So it's really handy. We've got tutorials on our website here using this URL that explain how to set up an account and kind of how to go through it. But we're also happy to meet with you one-on-one if you need assistance once you get into it. And we're happy to meet with you anyway, if you're looking for a very specific type of opportunity for a specific research project, or if you want something more broad, like a strategic funding plan for yourself, that's kind of tailored to where you are as a researcher. So please reach out and ask to meet with us. We really enjoy doing this sort of thing.
Actually, so for Pivot, you can also find collaborators. You can also search for collaborators in Pivot within UTC based on expertise, and you can also find them outside of UTC as well.
That's true. Yes. Thank you. So some other areas you may want to check to find funding opportunities. If you're interested in federal opportunities, grants.gov is a one-stop shop for that. You can sign up for their newsletter and they will send you daily updates with new postings. Additionally, you can sign up for individual federal agencies. If you know you only want to apply to NSF, for example, you can just sign up directly for the directorate that best fits your research. Philanthropy News Digest is another option. It pretty much focuses on corporate giving programs and foundations. So it's a nice complement to grants.gov and some of the federal agencies that you would link to directly. And then ORSP handles limited submission competitions. So when you have a program that limits the number of proposals that an institution can submit for funding cycle, we have to hold an internal competition for that to determine who goes forward. So we use a platform called InfoReady Review for that. We also do some internal grant competitions here that are funded by UTC. Right now, the only one we have ongoing is the Open Publishing Support Fund. So if you are preparing a publication and it's going to a journal that is open access, you can submit to that program in InfoReady Review. And if it meets the criteria, you can apply to get some funding to help pay for the open access fees. So we're excited about that one. We don't handle every single internal grant that UTC offers. Some of those are handled directly by the college itself, or the Walker Center, I believe, has some opportunities and oversees that process too. So once you've found a funding opportunity that you're interested in, you want to go through and assess it and make sure that it's a good fit for your research project or your research in general. So the early things you're going to want to look at is to make sure that UTC is an eligible organization and that you are eligible to submit as the PI, because some programs limit who can serve as a PI, whether it's on tenure, based on tenure or research background or something like that. So check for that. Also look to see if there are any limits to the number of proposals that can be submitted by an institution. If so, if you're working on one and you see that, please let me know immediately, because I'll have to initiate an internal competition for that. There are also sometimes limitations for how many proposals you can serve on a project team for. So some of them will limit it for, you can only be a PI or co-PI or senior personnel on one proposal per competition. And that can include when we are a sub on somebody else's proposal or we're a collaborating institution. So pay attention to those things. In addition, the sponsor's priorities are really important to pay attention to, making sure that they overlap with what your research is and what you're wanting to do. Those two things should talk to each other. The deadline, making sure that you have enough time to submit a competitive proposal, even if it's a really great fit for your research. If you only have 2 weeks to put it together, you may not have time to put together a competitive proposal, and it may be better to wait until the next funding cycle. With the budget, look at what the budget limit is, if there are any limitations on allowable costs, and then if there are any cost share requirements. And if there are cost share requirements, you'll have to get department head approval before the time of submission. So those are some things to look for budget-wise. And then we'd like to look at the prior awards for the programs, especially the federal agencies, to kind of see how many awards are going to be made and what types of organizations they've funded historically. This is especially important with things like foundations that you don't always know a whole lot about. So if you can see where they've funded before, if predominant, like 95% of their awards go to organizations in New York, UTC may not be the most competitive applicant. And then on the flip side, if there's only one award going to be made for the entire US, UTC or you may not be the best or the most competitive application for that program. Some other things you want to pay attention to, we get really comfortable with NSF. They tend to have set requirements for things, but a lot of the programs that come out now have some very special instructions for maybe just one component or multiple components. So paying attention if there's any special attachments that you have to submit, supplemental documents, or any requirements within those supplemental documents. And then with letters of commitment, making sure that you are sending those requests out to your partners early in the process. You don't want to give them only a couple of days to get something signed, because especially if you're working with an external institution, they may have their own process, and they do have their own process for getting things approved before they have someone sign it. So if you're coming to them really close to the deadline, they may not have time to do that, and then they have to decline to participate. So you don't want that to happen. Always work with any potential partners early in the process, and making sure that you have time to gather all of those items that you need. Oops. Going the wrong way. Okay. So also within the solicitation, you want to look for things that stand out in terms of text. So look for bold, italics, or highlighting language like strongly encourage. Those are highlighted in the solicitation for a reason, so you want to pay attention to those. When it's time to contact the program officer, look at how you contact them. Is there a generic email, or is there a specific person that you talk to? Does it depend on your research area? And then with some solicitations, they give a very limited time frame of when you can actually submit questions to the program officer. So pay attention to that as well, because if you submit a question after that time frame, you'll get a terse email that says that we've received your question, but it's outside of our window, and that's all you get. So make sure you're looking for that.
And a quick note on contact information. Oftentimes our office will reach out to the program officers as well if there's something that's unclear, if we need clarification, if we have additional questions. So we're always happy to reach out on behalf of you as well. And we have our own questions. So don't hesitate to ask for help, or if you're unsure, unclear about something.
Absolutely. So the other thing to look at is what's the review criteria, because that's what the review panel is going to be judging your proposal based on. So you want to make sure that all of those things that they list are reflected in your full proposal. So this is an example of how some of these restrictions and limitations may appear in the solicitation. NSF is really good about pulling out limitations for PI and number of proposals for organization. So for some other sponsors that may be buried a little bit, but this is one way it could look. In terms of deadlines, some solicitations will give a nice table or chart, and then pay attention for things like a deadline for letter of intent and one for full application there. A neat one with this particular solicitation, they gave you a time frame for the award negotiations. So you know when you're setting a start date, it would have to be after July 2022 in this case. Also pay attention to the deadline itself. Is it due at a specific hour? It may be. And then note which time zone it's in. And sometimes you may have to dig for that information. And then here's where I was talking about the award information. NSF's good about pulling out how many awards will be made and the total allocation. Sometimes funding agencies won't give you a minimum or maximum budget that you can request, but if you kind of know what the allocation is overall and how many awards they're expecting to give, you kind of know what kind of windows they're looking at in terms of how much they're willing to give each proposal. Okay.
So once you've found your funding opportunity, assessed it, and confirmed that it's a good fit, how do you get started? And what considerations should you have? So begin working on your proposal well in advance of the deadline, and make sure that you let ORSP know that you're working on it. Even if you're not 100% sure that you're going to submit it, just let us know so we can keep it on our radar and we can keep up to date if there's any updates. Sometimes they'll change guidance or they'll change deadlines. So just let us know, and so we can also help you. The earlier we know, the more we can help. And when you start working on it early, that gives us time to prepare checklists and templates and gather other resources for you, so you can kind of focus on the writing itself. And we can go through the guidance and kind of delegate what ORSP will do and what you can do. So you'll have that information early on, so you're not spending and wasting time doing something that our office would handle for you. And another good strategy when you are starting early is to kind of block off some time in your schedule. So maybe a few hours a week, but just make sure that you have enough time to prepare a competitive proposal. You don't want to be working on this the night before. I'm not saying it won't get funded, but that's not the best practice.
Right.
So one of our top recommendations is to reach out to the program officer to discuss your project and make sure that it is a good fit and that it does align with the funding priorities. We've had a few instances where, well, let me back up. Our recommended method is to submit a one-pager summary of your project via email to the program officer, and then request to set up a Zoom meeting or a call later on. This will give the program officer time to digest your research and to confirm if it is a good fit for the program. We have had a few times where a UTCPI has reached out to their program officer thinking that their project was a perfect fit, and through conversations, the PO said, that won't quite work for my program, but let me direct you to my colleague. So then RPI submits to a different program, a more different focus area that's a better fit. And they wouldn't have known that if they hadn't discussed it with the program officer. And it's really important to cultivate those relationships because, program officers are there to help you and they want to fund successful projects. They're a resource, and I don't want you to feel afraid to contact them. And also don't be afraid to repeatedly follow up because program officers are really, really busy, just like we all are. Sometimes they miss emails. So it's always a good idea to just follow up if you haven't heard a response. Okay, as we previously mentioned, we can request previously funded proposals to give you a sense of what's been funded in the past. Okay, other good strategies for when you're preparing your proposal. Assemble your team. So that could be, your team could be internal to UTC or external partners. Make sure that you have everybody on the team that's needed. So if you need a computer scientist with a certain expertise, and if UTC doesn't have somebody with those qualifications, where are you going to find that person? You're going to need to have them on the team because the reviewers they're assessing whether the team can do the work. So if you're missing a key component, they're going to notice, and a key person. So involve your team early, and you can also delegate tasks as needed. So the earlier you are, you can kind of also set expectations and deadlines for all of your collaborators. So that way everybody knows up front what's required of them. Again, you don't want to get in a situation with the last minute where someone thought you were doing it and then another person thought that someone else is doing it, and then you have to scramble at the last minute.
Right. And it's especially important when you've got an external evaluator that you have to include in your proposal, making sure that they're on board early so that they can help you craft that section. You shouldn't be doing that for them since they would be implementing it if the project was funded.
Good point, Ashley. Also make sure that your project is ambitious but realistic. So if you're going to propose 5 years worth of work in a 2-year period of performance, that might be a little too ambitious. The reviewers want to know that you are able to get the work done in the time frame, but they want to see you push yourself. So on the flip side, you also wouldn't want to propose a month's worth of work for a 5-year time frame. And then lastly, which this step sometimes we can kind of forget about, but try and allow yourself some time for proofreading and editing. Make sure you have, maybe ask a colleague or your department head to review your proposal ahead of before it's submitted. And again, remember that if there is enough time, Orsp can identify an external reviewer to provide feedback on your proposal before it's submitted. And few other key points here. Make sure that your proposal is reader friendly. You don't know how long a reviewer will actually spend looking at your proposal. So you want to make sure that you have white space, that it's easy to read, and that information is easy to find. So if the solicitation requires you to include items 1 through 5, make sure that you include items 1 through 5, and it's very clear to see that information and easy for the reviewer to quickly find it. Because the last thing you want is for, if you include the required info, but they can't find it because it's buried halfway through paragraph on the last page. All right, thank you, Ashley. Some additional questions to ask yourself when you're preparing your proposal. So what do you want to do and why do you want to do it? That why is something that you're really going to have to think about. How much will it cost and how long will it take? Does your proposed project relate to the sponsor's priorities? If so, how? Remember, the funder wants to fund things that are relevant to them. So don't propose something that's way out there that has nothing to do with what they want to fund. And how will your project be impactful? Will it be impactful to your own research, to your students, your field, maybe the community, the state, the nation? You'll want to consider how your research is impactful and to who. So do you know what has already been done in the area of your project? What are the knowledge gaps? And how do you plan to actually do your project? So this is where milestone charts become in handy, timelines, things like that. So you might have this great idea, but if you can't articulate how you're going to do it, that could be a little problematic. How will the results be evaluated or analyzed? And this one's kind of probably the most important bullet. Why are you, and not somebody else or not a different institution, why are you the best person to do this project? All right, switching gears a little bit to talk about budget basics. So the theme of today is work with ORSP early. So work with us early to begin developing your budget. Very rarely do we do a budget in one draft. Sometimes it can take 5, sometimes it can take 10 drafts, especially if you have last minute changes, or if you, realize that you're missing someone from your team that you needed. That could be a last minute change. So there will be, the budget development process will take as long as the proposal development process. Align your budget and your narrative. Remember that the budget is the financial representation of your project. So if you are proposing, outreach activities within your project narrative, you want to make sure that your budget reflects that and that you've included costs for outreach activities within your budget. Your budget should be as accurate as possible. So using actual salaries and fringes, quotes if you have them, maybe prior expenses for when you purchased something previously, and then making sure that we use the accurate and appropriate F&A rate or indirect cost rate. It's important to request what you need. So reviewers will look at budgets to make sure they're reasonable, and we do see that in the reviewer comments. They will say this budget is reasonable, or this is way too much to request. You want to avoid under budgeting. So we have heard some things where faculty might think that if they lowball it, that they might get a better chance of being funded, and that's not necessarily true. We encourage you to request what you need to meet the project deliverables, and try not to pad the budget, because you might have leftover money at the end and then that would have to be returned. So that's not a great situation to be in. And then along with the budget, ORSP can also help draft a budget justification outline for you. So once we have the general costs ready, we can just, kind of create a nice basic template, fill in all the numbers, and then that way you would only have to add in a few specific details. So typical budget categories that we see include personnel time and fringes. So personnel could be faculty and staff time, postdocs, to be hired positions, graduate assistants who receive a stipend and tuition remission, hourly graduate students and hourly undergraduate students. We also see travel cost often. So if you have to travel to site, conference travel, and this can be international or domestic. Supplies, equipment costs. So equipment is allowable, and the definition of equipment is a piece of tangible property that has a useful life of 1 year or more, with a per unit cost of $5,000 or more. Other typical budget categories include participant support costs. So let's say you want to host a workshop on campus and you want to bring 50 teachers from Hamilton County to participate in this workshop. You might offer them a $150 stipend for their time. So that would be considered a participant support cost. Other direct costs, you might have a sub-award to another institution, publication costs, and also survey incentives. Things like gift cards are also allowable, other direct costs. And then budgets will typically include our indirect costs, or F&As. Those two phrases are used interchangeably. So if you hear F&As, that means indirect costs. If you hear indirect, that means F&As. And our current federally negotiated on-campus rate is 37.5% of modified total direct costs. Some funders will require proof of every budget line item, which is why we recommend being as accurate as possible. I have worked on budgets where they request even taxi taxi fare estimates, proof of salary, proof of fringes, proof of everything, conference registration, flights. So those budgets can take a while to prepare. And especially if you have to provide all that background data. And if you have to get quotes, you're going to have to start working on it early to make sure that you have enough time to gather those quotes. And funders typically have their own budget form. Sometimes it can be really simple. Other times they can be really complex, and they can include a kind of an overall budget plus breakdowns of cost per person, cost per month, cost per task. I've seen some really complex budgets. So this kind of aligns with, you won't be able to break down your budget by task if you don't know what the project is. So again, this is another example of how a budget and the narrative kind of align. And then on the flip side, some funding opportunities might only request a budget figure. So maybe they say, like, how much do you need for your project? And even though and then we would put in something like $20,000, but how do we get to that $20,000? Typically we would still develop an internal budget. So we would, you would request what you need. The funder wouldn't see our internal budget, but if we do receive an award, we know exactly what that $20,000 will cover, and that we are confident that we'll be able to complete the project with the money that we requested. A few additional budget considerations. Make sure you're familiar with the UT fiscal policies, especially things like summer pay. So if you're planning on working in the summer, note that your total summer pay cannot exceed 33 1/3% of your academic year salary. And this is for all combined summer activities. So that would be teaching a course, if you're on multiple grants, things like that. And if you have budget questions and we are not around, if it's on the weekend or something, or if you're just curious, we have some budget guidance documents on our website. So we have a budget development guide that shows examples and kind of justifications for why we budget things a certain way. And we also have some guidance for how to handle a subaward, consultant, or vendor. Ashley mentioned this earlier about cost share. So UTC does not include voluntary cost share unless the sponsor requires it. And there are some funders that will never allow it. There are some that will always allow it. So for example, the Department of Energy typically will always require 20% of cost share. So we would include it then, but if the sponsor doesn't ask for it, we do not offer it. And then make sure that you obtain any appropriate approvals early. So if you do have cost share in your budget, make sure your department head agrees ahead of time. If you're requesting a course release, you'll also need approval for that. And make sure your department head is in the loop. And just a few other project considerations. So as we mentioned, never sign anything that looks like a contract, anything that looks like a research-related agreement. That's all handled through ORSP. And Angie Morlock is the point of contact for contracts. And also keep in mind that we need to make sure that our projects are running smoothly, that we are spending our funds, and that reports are being submitted in a timely fashion, because if we are falling behind, this can affect awards. We have seen funders hold off on making awards until reports have been submitted. So it's really important to make sure that we do our stuff on time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. So just to give some general tips and tricks, steps to success, starting from the very beginning all the way through starting to write a proposal. So before you're even ready to submit a proposal, make sure that you've gotten established in your field, you've been publishing, you've been participating in conferences, and it's never too early to start collaborating and networking. Make sure you're cultivating relationships not only with potential collaborators for your project team, but with potential program officers and agency representatives, people that you'll be working with should you get funded. It's great to have those relationships in place for reasons like Sam's talked about, and to just help ease you into knowing where you fit in with the different programming at the agency you're wanting to apply to. Creating a pivot profile is a good start as well, becoming familiar with the grant opportunities in your field, because Pivot's going to send you those weekly email bulletins. Getting sample funded proposals, as we've mentioned, for some of the programs that you're interested in. This is primarily for the federal agencies, but we're happy to request those where we can. And then also, can't stress this enough, serve on review panels for the programs that you're interested in applying to further down the road, especially if there's one that you're interested in applying to next year. Go ahead and request to serve on that review panel. And usually you just email your resume, about 2 pages, to the program officer, and they can get you on those panels. And it gives you a really good insider's look at how the review process goes and what a competitive proposal looks like. And also take advantage of, related workshops and trainings. A lot of the agencies are offering free webinars, both on individual programs and then just overall. I know NSF and NIH have done their conferences virtually the last couple of years. And I expect to see a lot of things like that continue. And then we hold some on campus as well.
A quick note on sponsor workshops. Sometimes like NSF and NIH will also offer one-on-one meetings with program officers during these workshops, and that's a great opportunity you actually get face-to-face time or Zoom to Zoom time with somebody for, I think they usually last 15, sometimes 30 minutes, and you can discuss your research, and you can, it's really, really helpful to have those talks with your POs.
It is. Thank you, Sam. So tips and tricks for when you start writing the proposals themselves. Again, going back to our theme, reach out to us early. The earlier we know about our proposal, the more we can help. And we really do want to help. We want to make sure that you're submitting a competitive proposal, because we know how much time and energy goes into these things. And we want you to be as successful as possible. Again, allow sufficient time for programs that we have a high volume for. So career is one, any of the TDOC programs, REUs, we always submit multiple proposals for each of those deadlines. So the earlier you let us know that you're going to be submitting to that, the better we can help you get to that deadline. And then also all of the attachments and things that go in for proposal, they're not just, auxiliary things. They're things that the review panel do look at. They're really important. So your bio sketches are really important, making sure they're tailored to the project that you're submitting for. The data management plan, the facilities documents, all of these, the reviewers look at to make sure that you have the expertise and the resources in place to successfully implement the project that you're proposing. So they're really important. Also make sure that you're using the current grant proposal guide for the sponsor that you're applying to. And NSF and NIH revise theirs annually. NIH a little bit more frequently, it seems like. So make sure that you're using the most up-to-date forms and the guidance. And of course, if you're reaching out to us early, we're going to make sure you have those forms and the guidance. And then, 99% of proposals are not funded their first try. It's so rare. So we definitely want you to revise and resubmit. We don't want you to be discouraged. Get those reviewer comments back, digest them, reach out to the program officer, and set a time with them to go through your comments, and so they can help guide you on how to incorporate the things to really pay attention to. And then reaching out to us when you're ready to resubmit. If you're doing so early, we can, again, obtain an external reviewer. We especially love to do these for the resubmissions, because paired with the external reviewer and the reviewer's comments makes for a really, really strong competitive proposal.
So the last section, we're just going to briefly touch on some key compliance issues. So these slides have been provided by the Office of Research Integrity. So we won't go over them in details because we are not experts on these items. So if you do have questions, they should definitely be directed to ORI. So ORI, they are actually located within our office suite as well. And they also have a small but mighty team of just 3. And they are also currently working a hybrid schedule. So if you need to get in touch with them, the best thing to do is via email. The mission of ORI is to ensure that research conducted at UTC is in compliance with university, state, and federal regulations. Some of the, so one of their key compliance issues that they deal with is human subjects research. So if you know you have human subjects, or if you think you will, it's a good idea to discuss this with ORI at proposal planning stage, so they can make sure that what you're proposing is going to be approved and is allowable. They can kind of help you design some help, they can kind of give you some guidance on having human subjects research. And a quick note on time frame, if you do have human subjects research, the recommendation is that you submit your IRB protocol to ORI at least a month before the merit review process, which can vary by sponsor. But if you know that it takes, 6 months to hear if you're, sorry, let me back up. If you know that the review is happening in January, you'd want to go ahead and submit your IRB protocol in December. That way, if your proposal is reviewed favorably, and if they come back during the just-in-time phase that we discussed, they might come back and say, we need to see your IRB approval. So if you haven't started it, it could take a few weeks to get it approved. So if you have it already in process, that way you can turn it around really quickly at the just-in-time phase. Okay, another compliance issue that they deal with, export control. So you can skip to the next slide. So just some examples of export control. So shipping or traveling with controlled items, sharing information, and providing for nationals unauthorized access to control items. So just another quick note on this. If you, some sponsors, it takes months to get for national approval to work on a project. So just be aware of that. This could be for students as well. If you plan to have a for national on your project, you might think about pushing back your proposed start date. I think we had one with the Department of Energy recently, and it took, like 3 to 4 months. I think for the student to be able to work on the project, it just takes a long time. So you want to take that into consideration. And then also relating to export control issues, it's really critical that you disclose everything on your annual outside interest disclosure form. So if you have outside interest or commitments, or receive compensation, or have relationships with foreign entities, make sure that's disclosed as well. And if that changes throughout the year, you can always update your disclosure form. But that's kind of becoming we're seeing that become a big deal across other campuses where things aren't going so well for those who don't disclose that information. Okay, another issue that ORI handles, so visiting researchers. If you have someone who's not employed or by the UT system, or who's not enrolled at a UT system institution, they will need sponsorship, a defined period of access, a background check and compliance review, and an IP agreement. They also handle research with biohazards. My understanding is that they are currently forming a biosafety committee. It's not in place yet, but it should be soon-ish. They also handle research with animals, and this is through IACUC. Responsible and ethical conduct of research. This is also known as RCR. You might hear that acronym. And this is required from certain required by certain federal agencies, including the National Science Foundation, USDA, and NIH. And RCR training is required for PIs, co-PIs, senior personnel, and even students as well. And they also assist with research misconduct investigations. So again, we are not experts on any of these ORI topics. So if you have questions, or if you might think your research would have one of these components, we definitely encourage you to reach out to ORI. The director, Dave Deerdorf, is incredibly knowledgeable. He has a long history of grant writing, and he's very familiar with the funding agencies, and he is a great resource if you have any kind of question related to research integrity.
Yeah, he really is. Sam, so that is our presentation. We can open the floor up to any questions if you have them. If not, we can let you get back to your beautiful Friday afternoon, go outside and roll around in the sunshine.
Hi, I wanted to ask a couple of questions. So the paying to have external reviewers review beforehand that you talked about way back at the beginning. Is there like a certain level of significance of the grant that you look for that, like a certain amount of funding that the grant has to be worth in order to justify doing that? Or like how do you decide that?
That's a good question. We don't really have a threshold. We typically, when we do have an external reviewer, it's typically for federal proposals, so ones to like NSF. That's not a hard and fast guideline though, just because part of it is we have a bigger pool to choose from because there are prior awardees, so we have kind of experts who would understand. I think it's probably a case-by-case basis. So if you're interested in that, and if you're whatever you're submitting, you could just reach out to us, and we could discuss with our director to see if there's funding available. It's a good question.
Yeah, so it was like a national level kind of grant. Yeah, makes sense.
Do you have other questions too, or was it just that one?
And then yeah, I don't know. My other thought was maybe it sounds like you do some like helping make long-term plans of when you're going to apply for what. And that sounds like something I need to do. So I'll definitely have to reach out about that.
Yes.
Do. Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely.
It's smart to start thinking about it now, because if you know where you want to be in a few years, it also helps. We can help you understand that. For example, NIH has something called an R1 application, and those are like their most competitive and most prestigious, but there's steps to get there. So they have smaller ones that that would build you up to get to that point. So I think a strategic planning would be really helpful. So whenever you are ready, just reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
If there are no other questions, I know Dr. Long had class, I think, so she's listening but not participating. So yeah, we can cut you loose, but thank you so much for joining us today and asking questions. We really have enjoyed the opportunity to share what we do and the services that we offer, because we want you to go out there and seek those grants and be as competitive as you can be. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day.